Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rylan Qualley, and we're going to dive into bodybuilding again because I have someone who I shared the stage with in bodybuilding in the overall competition, and he did beat me because he had a tremendous physique. Chris Watson has actually won the Classic Open overall in 2021, and then he also beat me in bodybuilding overall just this past competition. And I knew I wanted to have him on this podcast because I want to know how he did it and I want to know his story. And I knew going into the competition, he was going to be the hardest guy to beat in bodybuilding. So sure enough, I didn't beat him, but he had a tremendous physique and I wanted to know how he did, all of his methods and how he got into the sport. So we dive into all that this episode. We dive into, how he started. And I actually thought he had even more experience. I thought he had been doing it for many years and he's only done technically 3 total. But, in 2021, he actually did quite well. And so we're going to dive into that. I don't want to give all that away. I want him to tell his story. But it's a really cool because we dive into all of his training, like how he started his prep, how he used the coach's time. We talk about his last prep, and then we dive into all the details in how his approach was different than my approach. He was actually eating more calories than me, but he was doing a lot more cardio than me. So we're going to dive into all that, and it's a lot of fun. You're going to learn a lot within this episode as far as different styles, different techniques, and also the similarities within them. So without further ado, here is Chris Watson. Good day, Chris. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Rylan.
Yeah, so we're now, just a little ways out. This episode will air a little while after, but right now you and I are talking about a week and a half out from the bodybuilding show that we shared the stage with. And so, a lot of unwinding here, but, so much to talk about as far as bodybuilding goes. How are you feeling, week and a half out?
I'm feeling good. I've been eating pretty well for the last week. Getting back into the gym, getting back onto the diet. Trying to get back onto the plan because I did maybe go a little overboard on the food within the first few days there, but just trying to rein it in now and get back on plan.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
Yeah, similar. I actually did a pretty good job of, like, I'm not going to say I didn't splurge. Like, you got to have some splurges after that big haul. But I did a pretty good job of not what I used to do. I didn't feel like an all-out binge happened. And it was just a bunch of little treats throughout the weekend. And, my weight's actually staying pretty stagnant, which is good. I dove right into the reverse diet, which we're definitely going to talk about reverse dieting today. And we'll dive into all this stuff a little later in the show because I want to kind of give people a bit more of an awareness of who you are. I do a very mild introduction in my intro, but I love it when someone can tell their story. And I want to know your story. Like, I want to know kind of like, so where you're from, how you got into bodybuilding, like what inspired you to get into bodybuilding. And so let's kind of dive into it. I want you to introduce yourself and tell us about yourself and how you got into this sport that you're clearly so passionate about.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Winnipeg, in a community called Weston. I work as an engineer, so kind of fitness and bodybuilding is more of a hobby or a passion of mine. It's not something I work in, but I've always been into sports. I've always been kind of into fitness. I've played soccer and hockey from a young age. I continue to play soccer and hockey now. I got into weights when I was in high school, just trying to, improve my strength and build some confidence. And I kind of carry that through my adult life to now. I've always been interested in bodybuilding and weightlifting. Like I watched Arnold Schwarzenegger movies growing up, all those classic action movies. And yeah, I'd seen some stuff about bodybuilding. I'd kind of been aware that there are some local competitions, but I never thought it was something I could do until probably in the last few years. And then, yeah, around when COVID hit is right around when I had started going to the gym a lot more consistently. I was on a much more rigid workout plan. I kind of got my diet under control to the point where I was actually able to lose weight when I wanted to lose weight and build muscle when I wanted to build muscle. And yeah, I just kind of around that time, early COVID, is when I started looking into actually trying a bodybuilding competition. The gym I ended up getting a membership at, Brickhouse, they have a pretty big bodybuilding community. So I just kind of got to talking with some of the other members at that gym, and they encouraged me to give it a shot. And so I did. So I competed in my first competition in 2021, the Van Dyke Natural, and I won the classic physique overall in that competition. And after that, I went and did the Natural Canada pro-qualifier. That was about 5 weeks after the VDC. And I placed 6th in my class in that one. And then I took some time off to spend some good time in the gym, trying to build some muscle and build some strength before doing our most recent competition just last weekend.
No, that's really cool because I remember seeing on your Instagram, your transformation was tremendous. And I didn't realize how, like, I mean, your first bodybuilding show you win overall. Like that's incredible. I like to just come back a little bit to like inspiring you into the fitness because I tend to see different personalities get attracted to the sport of bodybuilding. And so I'm curious what like inspired you because like as a young kid, would you say that you were more of an ectomorph or more of an endomorph in the realms of fitness? Like, would you say you're more the skinnier type or more of, you know, you tend to put on weight easy or somewhere in between?
I'd say from a young age through about until I was about 12, I would say I was pretty thin. You know, I was a pretty lean kid, and then around 12 and onward, I started to be able to put on weight a lot easier, and that I kind of gained a little more weight than would be considered healthy, I guess, and I was a bit of a chubbier kid. So that definitely kind of affected my self-esteem and whatnot growing up. So that definitely affected my outlook and kind of I took that as motivation to kind of improve and get fit in the once I kind of was in high school and I had access to a weight room and started to be able to actually kind of research this stuff on my own and figure out what I needed to be doing. So
That's and that's just really interesting too, because seeing your physique and how lean you get, but I think it has to just how hard you push. Like I actually would have assumed that you stayed ectomorph, but like, I mean, even ectomorphs as they age can, you can get the skinny fat syndrome. For myself, I came from more the endomorph. So I was, I've just always been challenged with weight. And even if I get in shape, it's like I have to really watch my diet still because of just between appetite and just my body is an anabolic body. So I tend to see a lot of people from the ectomorph end be more interested in bodybuilding. It's not that, endomorphs. And I would say like you're somewhere in between, right? Because you started more on the one end and then with some other unhealthy habits, you end up leaning into it. But like you say, it becomes this idea that like, I got to improve myself. Like this is not the right way to do it. But let's go back to kind of how you evolved in this sport. So, you don't just make that decision overnight, right? So I think that's really cool. What was the motivation? Because like, I mean, it's my job to be fit. I'm a trainer, I'm an online trainer. And even when I did my first one 4 years ago, it's like, this is definitely good for my brand and my career. And you got to commit so much fucking time to do this. So what was the leverage point for you to be like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this thing. So what was the thing that pushed you into it in your first show?
Actually, yeah, I can nail down that moment to in early 2021. I'd been going pretty consistently to the gym. I had my diet under control, so I had made the initial journey to attain the physique that I wanted. which at the time was I wanted to lose weight because I think I started roughly around 190 at that time, which was pretty high for me. Um, I was I had brought myself down to about 168, and I was also building muscle at the same time. And I was kind of curious as to what my body fat percentage was, because I had a scale at home that it told you your body fat percentage through in it was one of those
Bioimpedance?
yeah, impedance. It was an impedance scale, and it was telling me I was in the range of 15%, which based on kind of what photos I looked up online of different body fat percentages, I thought was probably inaccurate. It was probably on the high end. So what I did is I looked into different body fat testing methods, and I ended up going with the DEXA scan. So in February 2021, I went and had a DEXA scan done, and my result came back at I think 9.5% body fat, which was it was lower than I thought it was. And the technician at the clinic asked me, she asked me, "Are you a bodybuilder?" And I told her, "No, I've kind of thought about it in the past, and it was something that I was interested in, but I wouldn't consider myself a bodybuilder." And she said, "Well, we sponsor this event called the Van Dyke Classic. There's a competition coming up. You should look into it because I think you'd be a good fit." So I went home that day. I Googled the Van Dyke Classic to see what it was all about. And yeah, I saw the event was at that time was 14 weeks away. And I looked at the poster, and actually there was a guy on the poster who went to my gym. So I took that as a sign that 14 weeks, that's a pretty good prep window. And I messaged the guy that I saw on the poster, and I asked him, "Hey, can I sit down with you and ask you some questions about bodybuilding?" And we ended up getting together for a workout, and I asked him a bunch of questions about posing, about how competition works, where do I get trunks from, and he answered all my questions. We ended up becoming good buddies, trained together for a while. We still train together from time to time. And yeah, I kind of that day I decided, I'm going to try this. 14 weeks, that's plenty of time to get everything together. So from that day, I just started doing all the research I needed. I started figuring out, what kind of diet do I need to be on to get ready for the competition? What does peak week mean? What poses I need to be practicing, how to practice them. And I kind of just took it from there and just dove right in, kind of immersed myself in the culture.
That's pretty incredible. I'm glad that you pointed out that bioimpedance is so inaccurate. It should technically be a reliable measurement because it's like a computerized system. But what people don't realize is how much it relies on your hydration status, and it's just so out of whack. So it's when people say, "Oh yeah, the scale had me at whatever," it's like it don't even look at it. Like it's just a useless number in my opinion. But yeah, the fact that you are on a DEXA scan and under 10%, which people don't realize, skin folds, that's like 7% or 6%, and you're not even in prep phase yet, is incredible. So that's really awesome to start your prep there. And so this is your first show in 2021. Now, a couple of things there. So first off, that was during like still COVID lockdowns and stuff. And I was going to do that show and they kept moving the goalposts. So when you actually, because initially it was in the spring and then moved to the summer, then to the fall. And like by the time they moved it out of the summer, I was like, okay, this is too long. At what point did you decide to jump into it because they had changed it so long? Was it like, did you end up timing it well to properly prep for the fall show, or how did that work out?
So for me, the timing was, I believe it was early February was when I made the commitment to myself to do the show. And I remember I was 14 weeks out at that point. So that would put the show, I believe in May at the usual time, or it was May or June, somewhere around there. It was after the first time it got delayed, but then it got delayed further to October, or the end of October. So I started prep while it was still planned for spring, early summer.
Hmm.
And then, of course, uh, I think we were 6 weeks out when we got the notice that it was postponed till the end of October.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of on the fly adjust my diet to more of a maintenance slash
Hmm.
slow kind of a little bit of a surplus. So I ended up gaining a bit of weight for a couple months and then going back into prep mode closer to the show. So
Right.
that was definitely a a hurdle to get over, but I think I navigated the challenge pretty well.
Well, and this is the second point I want to make. You didn't have a coach.
No, I didn't. I kind of
Wow.
just figured all this stuff out myself. I had a lot of help. I didn't have a coach, but I had a lot of people helping me along the way. So
That's incredible. And because like I mean, I didn't. I would say I had better coaching this time. Like I invested in my coaching time a lot more. My coach for this one was helping me, but this time we had meetings, we met all the time. Like for you to do that, like you say, you're gonna have support talking to people, but at the same time, coaching it makes such a difference. In this last show, you had a coach, though, correct?
I did. Yeah, I went with a coach that a friend of mine was using at the time, and I had actually met him in Toronto for my natural pro qualifier show, and that's kind of
Nice.
how I got in touch with him. And yeah, I'd say going with the coach this time around, it was it helped, but it had its own challenges as well.
Yeah, because you got to meet values, right? Whereas the biggest thing to me was because in 21, I was planning on doing it. I was initially trying to do it by myself, but I had too many ideas in my head that I needed someone to make calls for me. But at the same time, that's where my coach actually falls in line with my values. We have a lot of the same. He's my mentor. Like he gave me all my experience. So we have a lot of the same core beliefs. And then you meet someone else. It's like, oh, yeah, you should do this. And it's like, I don't think that's like something I believe works that well. So, like you say, it comes with challenges. But I just got to come back to giving you credit. Like that's fucking incredible that your very first show, you won. But let's go over your wins there because you won first overall in classic physique and bodybuilding, or for sure classic, right? In your first show.
Yeah, classic. So that show, technically, I won first in my class for bodybuilding, but I was the only bodybuilder at that show.
Mm.
Um, there was nobody else in bodybuilding. In classic physique, I was the only one in my class, so I essentially won my class and
You
then
get the
went to the
buy,
overall.
yeah.
Yeah, so I got the buy, but in the overall there was two other competitors, both very strong actually. Um, I don't know if you do names or if you're
Yeah.
familiar
You
with.
can mention them.
Yeah, so one of them was
Okay.
TJ Appleyard, I believe, and then the other was Anis Husseini.
Okay.
Both incredible. I think TJ's actually doing the Toronto Pro qualifier this weekend, and Anis went on to do the natural pro qualifier, and he got third in his division or his class.
Wow.
So very impressive, both of them. But yeah, it was not an easy competition to win at the time, and um, but I think I was able to pull it off, which was quite a surprise for me actually at the time.
Well, I mean, just super incredible. Like I said, COVID, and then on top of that, your first show on your own. That's amazing. Well, let's dive into your amazing performance this year, but I want to start at the prep phase because you did some building. As I told you off air, we're gonna have you on for a building episode. I want to know kind of your method to your madness because I think what's also really healthy is that you had said you did a show, you took time off, and like taking 2 years off is super healthy for building. So we'll talk about that in the future. But let's dive into the prep here. So, how many weeks out did you start your prep?
Sure. We started, I would say had a bit of a soft start 16 weeks out. So that was when we made our first adjustments to the meal plan. I was on a meal plan prior to prep, but it was on like a maintenance slash bulking
Mhm.
a bit of a surplus. And then we first went into a deficit about 16 weeks out. And there was minimal cardio at the time. It was a very slight deficit, just to kind of gauge how many calories and how much cardio I needed to do to start the weight loss process. And then at 12 weeks is when we started going hard, because that was at that point, I was, in my mind, I had to lose about 2 to 3 pounds a week to make the proper weight for the competition. So soft start at 16, and then we started going hard at 12 weeks out.
And when you're looking at your soft start, so let's just get a sense of the calories here. You started your maintenance to surplus around what, and then you evolved into the calories for your deficit at around what?
So we started, when we were maintaining, it was about 3,000 calories.
Okay.
I didn't get a chance to kind of build up to a higher calorie number, which is what I think you would aim for in an off season. But we started about 3,000 for maintenance, and then 2,800 is where we started our cut at, and then worked our way down through, I think we were dropping about 100 or 150 calories every week or two, until we got down to about 2,200, and then before we started our depletion phase.
Okay. Okay. So you actually, that's interesting. So you were able to stay at 2,200 calories for quite some time. Like, it's just interesting to hear how people do preps different. Because I mean, I was similar to yourself, where I had a maintenance / surplus in my build phase. That's mainly because I have such an appetite that I had to tell myself I'm aiming for a maintenance, but it ends up being a surplus on the weekends. And then I just went right to 2,000 calories. I just said, hey, as long as I'm above my metabolic rate, my BMR, and I don't feel depleted, I just, like 17 weeks out, I went right to that. It was 1 or 2 hard days. And other than that, I was actually usually pretty satiated. And I did that until about the 4 to 5 weeks out, like hard cut phase.
Mhm.
When you say the depletion phase, is that 2 weeks out? Is that 1 week out? Like, how many weeks out are you starting your depletion phase?
I'd have to go back and look at my diet plan, but I think somewhere around 4 weeks to 2 weeks, in that range, was where we started getting to the point where I was no longer able to fully replenish.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 2 weeks out is where we were pretty much, I think we were down to minimal carbs, so maybe 60 or 70 grams carbs a day
Mm-hmm.
at that point. And then, of course, peak week was the first 4 days was no starchy carbs, like no rice, no potatoes, just nothing but protein and broccoli at that point.
Yeah, just
Um,
veggies. When you're,
yeah.
how many calories are you aiming for in let's say the last 2 weeks?
Last 2 weeks, so my 2 weeks out, I was at 1,800, and then for the peak week, we didn't. I calculated the calories. It was about 1,500 at that point for
Right.
peak week, 1,500 a day for the first 4 days.
What was your protein intake like? Did you keep that pretty steady throughout, or did that slowly titrate down as well?
Protein actually went up as we reduced carbs. So
Right.
the idea being that when you're on a high carb diet, your body doesn't look for protein from your muscles or look for
Right.
energy from your muscles as much. So you don't need to have as much protein in your system.
Mm-hmm.
But once you start reducing your carbs, then you risk using
Muscle
muscle mass.
atrophy. Yeah.
Yeah. So then that's when you want to jack up your protein intake, just
Yeah.
to make sure you always have it in your blood.
Totally. Protein leveraging is huge. I actually just started at like 260 off the bat because it's just so satiating.
Mhm.
And you just get gluconeogenesis. I call it like an ultra low glycemic index carb, because if you're plateauing on your anabolic stimulus from protein somewhere around your lean mass anyways, And then when people are in a build phase and they have a hard time with appetite, I'm like, yeah, bring it down. Don't have your body weight, because it's probably not a build feature for you at that point. But when you're in a cut phase, it's like, we need satiety and we don't want anything to happen to the muscle, or minimal, right?
Mhm.
And then so when you think about it, it's going to be gluconeogenesis, but that's a slow process, right? It's not like it's a slow glycemic carb. It's an even slower glycemic carb, because it has to break down the amino acid, convert it into a carbohydrate, and then it can be used in that realm. So that's why, like, I just feel like when someone has an appetite, like, have more than enough protein, as long as you keep your calories appropriate. So I like that move, though, how you kind of titrate it down or titrate it up as the carbs come down. So that's, and it's really interesting to hear, again, so just difference in different things, in different strategies, how we had done it. And I'm actually going to have Brett Raffel on here shortly, and his episode will probably air first, but hearing his strategy, because he encouraged me to go even lower calories. So
Really?
oh yeah, like, this is what's interesting is you started at near the same calories as me, because I was, like I say, I was aiming for 2,700, probably having 3,000, 3,200 some days, right? But that's, again, my appetite and my body just wants to put on mass. Like, it just can so easily. And so I just wasn't telling myself, if I tell myself I'm bulking, I just eat like an asshole. So it's super important that I keep that controlled. And I just think, when you think about metabolism, what's really interesting is, let's say you put it into a calculator, and this as an engineer, like, when it comes to all these equations that we have, it is just correlative data, right? So you have X equals Y times A or B, right? And so when you have that, it's a spectrum of metabolisms. So even though I can put that into my food tracker, I can put in all these calculations, but if it was a scatter plot, I'm probably on the low end, simply, like, on a BMR scale, simply because of my genetics. And that's
Mhm.
kind of the part of the natural genetic feature that we're going to have. Some people have a natural BMR higher, some people have a natural BMR lower, even at a given body weight, right?
Mhm.
So I started around the same calories as you. I went lower quicker. And I will say that, and then we'll talk about the cardio after. I will say I had a much different approach on cardio. And then near the end there, I went from 1,800 to 1,650 to 1,400. And then one day I did a 1,250 calorie day. But let's talk about the 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 cardio effect, because that has a big implication. Now, what I'd love to hear how you guys basically started to introduce it, and did you guys track steps at all, or is that just a metric you don't worry about?
Steps we didn't track. I think my coach's mindset, I think, was he would prescribe a specific amount of cardio and see how it affected me, and then adjust as necessary. And then any external factors outside of the prescribed cardio, like daily step count or activity outside the gym, was just kind of would average itself out over time.
Right.
So I think that was the assumption. So we started with, it was at the soft startup prep, we were on 5 minutes warm up and then 10 minutes cardio after the workout. And then from there, it was just, he would add 5 minutes, every week or every other week till we got up to, I think by the end, I was doing, for the last 2 weeks before peak week, I was on an hour of cardio 5 times a week, five or
And
six
so
times a week.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I remember seeing it at the show, and I was like, man, you're so conditioned. You're like, yeah, an hour of step climber for 2 weeks will do that to you. And
Yeah.
so that's actually something. So the method of cardio and heart rate zone, I'm really interested in. And I wasn't sure if you would track the heart rate zone, but, like, how intense is that cardio?
So I started my cardio on the treadmill. I was doing incline walking on the treadmill. That's what I did in my first prep when I did it all myself. But then I think I had a sense of urgency that I needed to be working harder at a certain point in prep. So I made the switch to the stair climber. Um, and for the stair climber, I was setting it to the same speed every time I used it. So I wasn't tracking my heart rate. I know it was getting pretty high. Like, I think it was, if I had to guess, I was in the 140 to 150 range. Um, and I was basically, I put it at a speed where within 10 minutes I would start sweating, and then by the end of the workout I would just be drenched. The
Right.
goal was work hard enough so that you're sweating.
Yeah,
So
burn as many calories as you can within that duration. And that,
yeah.
the thing that I give a lot of credit to, like, so I did it very different because I didn't add cardio until the last like 3 to 4 weeks. I would say I would hop on a treadmill to get steps in. And what I like about the step counting is that that is constant, or that is like trackable every day, and you can fit it into life. So I can go for a walk in the morning and not break a sweat. I can go for a walk in the evening and not break a sweat, and I'm not using carbs. And so that was always the thing, is like carbs are precious for strength training. And if I could just be very low intensity, now here's the caveat. You do a 30-minute step climber at 150. I do an hour of stepping outside. You burn probably even a bit more calories than I did. It took me twice as long. You use more carbs, but you saved your time. Like, cardio is more efficient if you increase your intensity. But my whole thing was systemically. And again, remember, you're eating more calories too. So there's kind of like, I just like comparing these styles to see how you're different. And I totally always knew, because I had done the incline walking the first time, that is way more efficient. But it is fucking exhausting mentally and physically and systemically. Like, my legs never recovered in my first show. They never felt like they had energy. I actually had pretty good energy, good strength performance on most days and most of my prep. But stepping isn't always efficient, right? Like, I'm luckily, this is my business and I can take time for walks and I can fit it in. One of the other things I was curious, just within that too, you had said all the extra activity kind of averages out. Were you doing any other sports? Are you still playing hockey? Were you doing anything else vigorous?
Yeah, I was still playing hockey. I was still playing soccer until about, I think those seasons ended about 6 weeks out or 5 weeks out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to, if they didn't end, I would have probably cut them by around that same time as well, because that's when I started to feel more depleted on a day-to-day basis and weaker
Right.
in the gym. So I knew I was losing strength at that point, or at least not recovering fully. And I try to, at that point, cut out any activity that might get me injured.
Right. For
which,
sure.
of course, soccer and hockey can be pretty physical. Other than that, I would go for walks on my lunch break at work just for extra steps. And then I go for long walks on the weekend, which is just kind of something that I like to do.
Yeah.
So yeah,
sure.
I was kind of adding a bit of extra walking just to, again, burn a few extra calories, try to get that little bit of extra leanness by the competition.
Yeah. Yeah. You realize that walking is just, to me, is actually the best exercise. We just don't realize it. It's especially like, because you're engineer, you have an office job. I'm actually very sedentary worker with online training. Like, you actually need to do that. Like, that, as much as we need to do strength training, we do. But if someone's asked me what the most important exercise is, I'm actually going to tell them it's walking. If it's not a part of your job, it's going to be making sure you fit in walks first.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to try to get into some strength training, because it's just, you would even say, like, on the weekend when you're not training, that's actually like a great recovery, right? You just
Mm-hmm.
go for some nice long walks. Now, I wanted to know more about the training, because I know my training volume approach is much different than a lot of bodybuilders. So I'm really curious about your training in terms of the volume, how you guys would, like, how many days a week, and what kind of rep ranges, and how would you kind of work your own progressive overload?
Sure. So do you want just specifically prep or?
Yeah. Let's focus on the prep, because what's interesting, like, if we can imagine, let's just imagine we did a build phase. You built what you built, but
Okay.
they're still addressing, like, I even had some weaknesses that I tried to build up. Like, you still, like, what people hopefully understand or may not understand is, like, when you're in a bodybuilding prep, you're not doing significant building. The whole goal, or the major goal, is let's hold on to everything we got. Now, I mean, for the exception of maybe a really big stimulus that you haven't had before. And so what I noticed with mine, because I did DEXA scan before and after, was there was imbalances between my right and left arm, and they almost disappeared because we doubled the volume on my arm. The differences in my lats, noticed a different, like it came in within just photos. But that's because I'd done so much extra volume on those body parts, but they still atrophied. So it's really just like, let's prevent atrophy, right?
Mhm.
So I'm curious of your approach for this during the prep, of like how your coach would get you to do the appropriate strength volume. Was it high volume, medium volume, and how would you kind of progress it?
Yeah, so he was giving me, um, he had me in working in phases. So I think each phase was roughly 4 weeks. He would have me in an accumulation, acclimation, and realization phases, I believe they were called, which is kind of like a powerlifting um, phasing. So we would start with some high volume, low weight workouts. So we were doing lots of reps, kind of in the lower weight range. I think we were looking at about 80% of the 1 rep max range. He would include a lot of extended sets for that particular phase. So we were doing lots of what would you call them? Drop sets. We're doing rest pause, stuff like that, stuff to work through failure or work beyond failure. And then as we move to the next phase, he would increase the weight and lower the reps. So we would kind of work more in the strength ranges, and he would add supersets, and he was constantly changing what we were working with and what we were working on. But we did focus on some of the weaknesses, which were we were trying to build hamstrings, so we were doing a lot of hamstring focused leg work. We were trying to build arms, so we were doing probably 9 sets biceps, 9 sets triceps twice a week. And then lats was another big one. So we were trying to focus on building thickness and width of the lats. But yeah, it was compared to what I gave myself, or how I would work out when I did it on my own. It seemed like it was less volume, just more extended, more techniques to work in that failure range more regularly. So a lot more extended sets and drop sets, that kind of stuff. But overall, the volume was pretty manageable, and I think each workout would take me roughly an hour to do, and I was in the gym 6 days a week. So his plans were 5 days a week, but I would just throw in a 6th day on my own, just because that's how I am. I kind of need to be in the gym six
I got you.
days. Like,
I get you. It's like a rest days get boring, you know. I get you. I actually did the 6 days during the build phase, and I'm convincing myself to not do it right now. Like I want to do a 6th day. I actually did the 5 days a week because I needed to give more time to posing, because I knew that was my biggest weakness in my first prep. I was terrible at posing. And so I'm like, that extra day, it forcing me to commit to it. And then I might have better recovery. I might have less DOMs, better mobility. And I would have done it, but it was a good pace. Like I do 2 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on, 1 day off. And it was a nice flow. So it works really well. But yeah, that sounds manageable. In the extension sets has been a huge thing, especially rest pause. Rest pause was a game changer for me to realize halfway through the prep. I'm like, why do a whole extra set? Like you're in the stimulus zone, you're hitting effective reps, you're hitting that in your failure point. And it was interesting hearing a few different really good trainers talk about how rest pause, or just, it's like that mechanical tension you're trying to create. And it became way more efficient. And if anything, I used it too much, because like I had mentioned, my calories are so low. And if I push too hard close to failure, then then I feel depleted. Then I'd feel systemically shocked. I'm like, okay, I can't work at like a 9 out of 10 RPE. It has to be 7 or 8. and I can still accumulate some volume, but it has to have more reps to failure. Did you feel that at all? Did you have to have a bit of an RPE concept, or were you always kind of trying to work right in at 9 to 10?
Um, he had, my coach had told me to stay out of the failure range for the most part. So we were working at about the 7 to 8 RP range.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then in some of the programs, he would prescribe certain sets to be to failure. So
Yeah.
For those sets, we would definitely be going right through failure. But I did have to adjust the weight, because a lot of what he was prescribing was, he would prescribe a tempo for all of this work as well.
Mm-hmm.
And before working with him, I was used to just doing the reps and not really thinking about the tempo of the reps. Whereas all of his exercises prescribed tempos, so we were doing 1 second contractions with 3 second eccentrics. We were doing 2 second contractions with 1 second pauses at the top, and then 2 second eccentrics, and then 1 second pauses at the bottom, stuff like that. And once you start adding that to your workload, like then, you notice that you're not able to do as many reps as you could at the same weights before, but you get just as good or more of a stimulus.
Oh yeah, eccentric loading is such a big difference, and even the like that was another thing that I feel like was actually affecting my recovery. And so I would say I try to find a good in between. Depending on the exercise, I would do a little bit more tempo in the eccentric, but I wanted to do the right amount where it was like a 2 to 3 second eccentric if it's like a barbell RDL. And then with like rows, I would in my prep sets, like ramp up sets, I would do more eccentrics. But when I had a heavy load and I just wanted the strength stimulus, I would go for just solid contraction, probably a 2 second eccentric, because like that was just causing so much more soreness. And when you're doing, I had a similar thing with like hamstrings and lats where coaches told me like, let's bring that up. And if you got to recover in 2 days, if you're eccentric loading that stuff, like it's like, well, now it's all hurt, so you had to kind of have that in between. But no, I love hearing this in like I say, some similar styles, similar techniques. So that's really cool. Quickly, I'd love to know about the posing. How often did you pose?
I was probably practicing maybe 10 or 15 minutes every, maybe twice a week.
Wow.
For my first competition 2 years ago, I did a lot more posing practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my friend Kim DeLorean help me with posing a lot back then, and Chris Mankasing, another guy I worked out with at Brick House, helping me with posing a lot for that first competition. And I feel like once you kind of develop the muscle memory, it does come back a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a lot of practice throughout the off season, just kind of at the gym between sets. I would try to hit some poses just to kind of keep it fresh. So that I think allowed me to maybe not work on it as hard this time around. Though that being said, I feel like I could have probably practiced more, and it may have helped me a little more.
Right. Yeah, it's a really, because that's a hard thing to put yourself through, right? You're in the mirror staring at yourself for 30, 40 seconds at a time. My posing coach said do 2-minute holds. I did that one day. It's like, that's fucking stupid. And hey, I got conditioned. So between my posing coach and my nutrition training coach, they said do it every day. And I hated it, but I just got it over and done with every day. And then when you saw those classic physique guys in True Novice, they are buckets of sweat, exhausted. And I'm like, yeah, I'm warm on stage, but I'm like, not dying. And like, I just couldn't believe how, like, I assumed it was just their poor conditioning and not comfortable. And they're like almost over squeezing. And so, the time you commit, like I would do something similar to yourself. I'd probably do a little bit more, but If I do another show, I'm always saying if because it takes so much fucking time out of your life. I would do like efficient, like yourself. Like if you got the muscle memory, just make sure. I think the biggest thing is train your transverse, train your stomach to be tight, and
Yep.
if you can train your stomach to be tight, like that's something my coach had said when he watched on stage. Like so many guys relax up there, and that ruins it, and
Yep.
that's gonna ruin your posing, and that's gonna like even when I see some guys do their 1 minutes and they're like going through all of these great poses, but then they relax their stomach. And it's like, actually, that's a part of it. Like, that's a part of your presentation. So I don't let my stomach go until I left the stage. And fuck if there was anything that was sore every day, it was from the first two to three, I think 3 months straight. I was trying to work transverse over work transverse. And I didn't realize I didn't need to, but then it was just trained. And so I had no problem holding. So there's some value to that.
How would you train your transverse?
So it was actually because I was really convinced to have, because I know I have wide hips and I have a wide core. So I
Mhm.
was really convinced that I need to have a really, like, not quite a vacuum, but kind of a vacuum on like my side relaxed. Basically, just always trying to hold it in and tight and not like a vacuum, but sucking in. Right. So when
Okay.
I was on my side, and then finally within the last 4 to 5 weeks, Brett had said, "Hey, like you have nice abs. You can just hold your abs there." And I was just convinced I needed a tiny waist. And I finally looked at it and I was like, "Oh no, that looks better with the abs." But before that, for like 3 months, I was like tiny waist, tiny waist, tiny waist, and doing like 30. It started at 60-second holds. Then I at least dial it down a little bit to 30. But for the longest time, it was front relaxed, tiny waist, side relaxed, really squeeze that waist, and then go back. You could relax a bit to show the back and you go through all the other poses. But especially the side relax on both sides. And anytime I was on my side, I was just trying to hold that stomach.
Hmm.
But that's like, for months, at least a couple of months, I was doing 60-second holds. I would take breaks in between rounds, but holy fuck was my core sore. And then in the last like 4 weeks, I finally could just hold the appropriate amount for the appropriate amount of time. And so I was very well conditioned in my transverse that way. So as much as it felt like a waste of time, in the end, it was actually serving me quite well. Yeah. But so let's dive into this here. Because I still want to fit in a couple things here before we wrap up. So you do the depletion phase. Your depletion phase, and then you did crazy dehydration, right? You had said it was like really tough. So was it like big water load, diuretics, and then any other kind of metrics? What do you use for diuretics?
Yeah. So for our peak week, we used Hydro Dry. It's all max supplement. I think it's dandelion root and juniper berries. Your typical um, natural diuretic. And we did a water load. Uh, for the first 4 days, we were 6 liters, 7 liters a day, and then um, on the Thursday we dropped down to 2.5 liters, and that's when we started the Hydro Dry. And then Friday was down to 1 liter with no water after 6, and then Saturday morning was 250 mils until the competition was done. So um, it worked pretty well for me. We didn't start the Hydro Dry until the Thursday, and I definitely noticed once I started that, I was able to just keep flushing water out even as we reduced water intake. And the changes that I saw in myself over that last 2 or 3 days was pretty incredible. So
Yeah.
I'd say we had a really effective dehydration phase.
No, yeah, you looked great. You looked terrific. And that's something I'd love to hear feedback because you had such a great show, great experience in the show. Um, what did you think of my physique? What did you think of, because I know it's hard because we were on stage kind of together. I wasn't sure if you noticed anything, and it'd be different if you actually saw some of my posing, but I was just curious.
Yeah, no, you had a phenomenal physique. I'll be honest, I was definitely um, kind of seeing your stuff leading up to the competition, and then seeing you when we are getting our tan. You know, I was worried. I was very worried because I knew we were going to be competing um, in bodybuilding together. I and then you had said you were doing classic as well, so I knew we might come up in
Mhm.
classic as well. I knew we were in different classes,
Mhm.
which was something I could, it was a bit of a relief for me, but I was definitely kind of intimidated by your physique there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I knew if I faced you in bodybuilding, this would be really hard to, because even Brett said, like, your conditioning, you have a skill of getting great conditioning, and that is something my body doesn't do well. And I probably could have pushed cardio a little sooner, but maybe I'm giving myself an out. And I think there's still a genetic makeup to it, right? Small hips, and even in your core, like, I don't have a small core. Like, I have a powerlifting core. And even like took the photo shoot the day after, and I'm looking at some relaxed photos that they took. I'm like, man, I don't look at like I'm like 6% body fat, but I am. So it's just kind of interesting. And so that's where I was like, if I see you on stage, I have to get lucky with how well my posing looks to try to look as proportioned as you are. Like, your size and your portion is just tremendous. So I knew it was gonna. I was just happy to share the stage with you. I thought that was a lot of fun. I think that was I was trying to outback you, because when you were going out there and you said, oh, he's doing the back, but I'm gonna do back double blind. I'm gonna do the front lat. I'm gonna do back lat spread. So so that was my go-to there at the end there. Although the judges are usually making their call at that point, but no, that was a ton of fun. It was great to share the stage with you. So there's a couple more things here. Let's talk about that reverse diet, because this is something that was like so important to me. Because last time it fucking just blew up. 13 weeks of miserable training and 13 days to fucking lose it. So I've been very like adamant about like slowly introducing calories. But I'm curious, because you said you kind of had a really challenging time because you did splurge, but it was just also probably majorly due to your diuretics that actually was a really hard shift for you in that week after.
Yeah, so the day of the competition and then the next day, I there was no regard to what I was eating. I just ate everything I wanted to at that point. I'd kind of stocked up. I've been a bit of an issue where I stock up on stuff that I want, so that I can have it for after the competition. And then after the competition, I have loads and loads of junk food, and I just want to eat it all, right? Even after I've kind of satisfied that initial like sweet tooth craving that I get, I just continue to eat and eat and eat. That combined with um, overhydrating, because once you get down to that level of dehydration, it's very hard to quench your thirst. So my coach, he gave me a reverse diet plan, or a plan for the day of the competition. He gave me a plan for the next day, and I just kind of disregarded it entirely. And his plan had me on a limited amount of fluids to kind of prevent that initial water bloat that you get when your body, which is so dehydrated, just wants to hold on to every ounce of fluid that you put in it.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of drinking 2 liters a day for the next 3 days, which is what my coach wanted me to do, I was just drinking non-discriminately. I probably drank 12 liters in that first 2 days, and none of it left me, right? Like, I just held on to all of it. So the fluids combined with, the high sodium intake and the high carbohydrate intake, just my body held on to all of this water. So I ended up, on the morning of the show, I was 154. The day after, I was 164. The day after that, I was 174. And then this morning, I was 180. And I think my body's finally starting to flush out some of the excess water that's been holding. So I'm hoping to, and now that I'm back on my diet plan, I actually went back on it in the last few days, got rid of all the junk food that I hadn't eaten yet, so it's not going to tempt me, and kind of back in the gym, back doing cardio. So I'm hoping that, given a few or a week or two on back on the plan, I can sort of settle my body down, get rid of all this extra water, and then settle down at a more reasonable 165 to 170 weight, and kind of then go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as soon as you told me your story, I felt way better about mine. Like, I mean, I was worried I had done a bit too much, but I felt like I did a pretty good job of it. And I tell you, like, the one of the best things I did throughout the prep was I always include treat meals, but they weren't like cheat days, you know, the typical bodybuilding, eat what you want. Like, it was always, let's have a treat and keep it modestly, hopefully near that 2000 calorie mark, probably over 100, 200 calories. There weren't the calories that were going to kill me. And it was always mindful eating. I would have it with my girlfriend. And it's like, if you can literally always keep these foods in, when it's over, it's like, yeah, I get the treat, but it's like, I'm not emotionally like drained from these foods, right? And so I was very intentful. It's like, if I'm going to eat something after, and it's going to be like, it was like a basic breakfast with one piece of French toast, and it was enough. You know, we had like just a well home cooked meal, and it was like improving that relationship throughout the prep rather than you know, creating this almost animosity slash, you know, deprivation towards, you're like a crackhead getting out of rehab, right? And so that was a huge thing for me. And even now, like, I kind of have an ebbs and flow model where I keep lower calories during the week, and then yeah, I treat myself on the weekend. I bring them up maybe close to a maintenance to a surplus. But like, I last week it was like 1800, then went eased up to about 19 to 2000, closer to 24, 2500 for a day, back down, up a little bit, and now I'm back to 2000, and I'm still like controlling my appetite well. So I mean, that's just like, that was so important to me to not get through that. So I've been where you're at, man. Like, I went to the United States after my first, I literally went on a plane the next day. I had the same diuretic thing where I couldn't fucking drink. And I immediately on a plane with a friend to go see a friend to go party in the States and to travel across the United States. So it's like nothing but fast food. And then you literally are like, why am I eating still? Like, constantly. And then we're supposed to be sightseeing. I was like, I don't even want to walk. I did cardio. I did walking for the last 3 months. Like,
Yeah.
you're just done. So I rebounded significantly better this time. And it's great to hear that you're on the right track. So what's the next phase here? Like, you won the overall. Like, are you looking at another competition? Are you looking at pro qualifier? Like, what's your next phase here?
Well, I kind of want to see where I settle down in a week or two here with where my weight's at and what my conditioning looks like. And I think that'll kind of dictate what I do next. So um, I am looking at maybe doing the natural pro qualifier this year, which is in 10, just under 10 weeks now. If I don't do that, then I would have to requalify for next year's. Then I would look at maybe doing the Golden Prairie Cup in the fall. That one's in about 14 weeks now. And that, if I did well enough there, it would requalify me for the natural pro qualifier next year. So that is where I'm at for kind of going forward with bodybuilding. I do kind of want to take some time to hit some strength goals. I do normally do a bit of a power building workout style. So I do like to hit PRs on bench press, PRs on squats, PRs on deadlifts. So I might look at taking some time off bodybuilding to focus on that, and then maybe look at doing a powerlifting competition next. Kind of still undecided at this point, so we'll see where we settle.
I love it. That's where I'm at, man. I'm, it's like, so that was a big talk with me and AJ. He's like, maybe you don't need to back squat throughout this. Like, you know, it's going to be systemically exhausting, and it might not, you have good quads. It's not you don't have to worry about as much, like focus on hamstrings. So it was a bit of a hard decision, but it really wasn't. It made sense. Did you pull out like bench press, deadlift, and squat within your training, or was that still part of your protocol?
I actually, this is something I learned from my first competition, was a lot of prep is mental. It's, you know, it's in your head. So you got to do things that you can to kind of maintain a positive attitude. And one of the things I noticed was that as my strength declined, which just happens as you get leaner, it started to really affect me. So I knew this time around that, yeah, as soon as I start seeing a decline in strength, or as soon as I start not able to hit the same reps or the same weights for the big 3 lifts, I got to cut them, because they're just going to affect me mentally.
That's a really good like notion. It's not just whether or not it systemically hits you, which is the reason I took it out, but it's like, let's just put the ego to the side and do some simpler stuff. That's a really smart approach.
So yeah, I did that, and I'll continue to do that for any competition, just because for the just to keep my positive mindset, and also as you get weaker, you're just more prone to getting injured doing those movements, right? Because maybe you try to push yourself a little harder than you should.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing too. That's the biggest thing is like you can't get hurt. You know, you're like 8 weeks in or 10 weeks in. Holy shit, you're 15 weeks in, and then you fucked up your knee or your back. And that's literally the biggest challenge of powerlifting is not getting hurt. How hard can you push yourself and have your body just not break?
Yep.
That's it. Like, you know, you try to have the best bar path where your body doesn't fucking snap. And so it's I get you. So I'm with you. Power building all the way. That's where I'm going now. It's big ego shot. When I actually try to do like a photo shoot the day after, I couldn't do anything. But some of the base strength is there. And I had done like a 1 rep test, a safe like RP of 8 out of 10 because it was the start of the prep. So I done a 1 rep test like 16 weeks out, and I'm going to give myself a month to see if I can, or I feel like I'll be able to come back within 2 months to the old ones, because, you know, it's a neurological connection. It just needs time to recover. And I'm excited to get back in the build phase. And maybe we'll meet you on the platform. We might be different weight classes, but I'll see you on the platform maybe in the new year. I really appreciate this chat, man. As I had mentioned, I'm going to have you on, talk about building, but let's give it some time, give you time to build, give me time to build, and we'll compare styles and notes, because I love this conversation. It was just so much fun to have you on the show to talk about your strategies, because tremendous physique. You're someone that I always looked up to hopefully knew that I had to push myself hard. And I was really honored to share the stage with you. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks again to Chris for being on the show today and offering to share all of his strategies. I thought it was really cool to hear how close we are, but also very different. When it came to training, I think it was very close. I think for the most part, I would say I took a little bit longer in the gym, but probably just due to my mobility. I would actually take a long time with trying to make sure that my joints were healthy, because I just have a lot of problems in my joints. But for the most part, you know, I would do those extended sets that he was talking about. And the fact that we would stay around the same RP was really cool. And he had a great strategy there of, you know, as soon as the powerlifting lifts actually aren't feeling good, just pull them out and make that assessment. And I thought that was a really cool strategy. And just hearing how they titrate their calories very progressively, how they brought up their cardio very progressively, I thought was really interesting. And his diuretic protocol or his dehydration protocol was different from mine. And, you know, at the end of the day, he won, right? He won against me. So got to give him credit for what he had done. And I think he deserves so much credit for doing his first show alone. That I thought for sure he would have had a coach. I thought for sure he had done more than one. But, you know, I've seen this before within the engineering type. So Prakatona is someone who I also trained with and sparred a bit. And he's now a pro MMA fighter. And he was an engineer. And he just knows to follow a plan and to keep it simple. And these are the metrics that I control, and this is what I do. And that's what I kind of feel I see within Chris Watson, which is just, you know, these are the numbers, these are the methods, and I'm going to execute it. And, you know, you hear what he had went through for the last 2 weeks, you know, in a heart rate zone of 140 to 150 beats per minute, when you're at your lowest calories, in the farthest end stage, when your body fat's already lean, like, holy shit. I had like 2 or 3 days that I had my heart rate in that zone within my prep. So again, I mentioned on the show, like, he spends, like, it's not his job. And I spend more time just doing walking to have that as my form of output because I had the time. If you have a job and you don't have the time, cardio is efficient to burn calories. Like, you do want that metabolic boost in this sport specific idea. Very important that you consider that. You know, when it comes to real life clients, you can use it, but I always tell clients to caution using cardio, because you got to consider that within your reverse diet. You got to consider, like, are you going to hate the whole process? Does that create a poor relationship with food? And I mean, that was another really valuable piece that made me feel better about my whole evolution. I know what it's like to go through what he's going through right after his prep, where he had all this stuff stored up, and I stored some myself, but it was like a handful of things. And most of the time I was actually eating the treats along the way. So I didn't have such a negative relationship with my meal plan. He only got back on his meal plan within the last few days. And I know this is airing much later, but for me, I got back on my meal plan 2 to 3 days after, and I wanted to feel just lighter on my feet. I didn't want to feel so bloated or even worry about putting on more weight. And me and him on this day that we're talking weigh the same. So again, I feel like I'm doing my reverse diet quite well, and I'm maintaining a good relationship with food, which to me was one of the most valuable things in this process that I wanted to come out of it. I didn't want to come out worse, and I came out feeling worse about myself in my first show. So I hope you learned a lot in this episode. I hope you see how there's different styles and techniques, and there's both drawbacks and benefits of different styles and techniques. And for me, it was really about looking at the whole process and what the process does to me after. So lots to learn there as far as how the bodybuilding has some specific tactics. But for the most part, you got to appreciate when we're going to the far end extreme, this is for the sport. This is not for lifestyle. No one should be doing excessively low calories. Notice that we always talked about within the last 4 to 5 weeks. That is the unrealistic approach for general public. You just do not need to do that. The only time I would say that I would understand it is if someone said, I want to do a photo shoot and look the best I can, which is, I think, what most people should approach like, hey, do I want to do a bodybuilding show? Prep for a photo shoot as if you do a bodybuilding show. Start there. And then we're going to do all the same things that you would normally do, maybe practice posing. Get your feet wet with that point of accountability, and reverse diet out of that. Now, you could just dive into a show, but I just think that's enough for most people to see their physique where they need to. But if you're really passionate about it, I totally understand wanting to get into it. For the most part, my main point is that's the only time that I would say, okay, I kind of understand why you'd want to go excessively low calories for that shoot to practice it. But no one should actually be doing excessively low calories below their basal metabolic rate if you're just trying to get lean because you want to feel good about your health and fitness. It's just not, it's not mentally healthy. And to get that lean, to get that satiation, look at what Chris had to go through with his food. And I'll tell you right now, within just a couple of weeks after the show, I'm starting to feel more body dysmorphia than I felt prior to the show. Prior to the show, leading the show, you're getting leaner, you're seeing success. And then after, it's like, oh man, it might be fading. Oh man, I'm not as defined. Oh man, I looked so good 2 weeks ago. And you have to quiet the voice and say, okay, this is healthy, or you're trying to get back to a healthier body weight. This is the part of the process. And so it's super important that people appreciate that there is a massive psychological component that isn't very healthy in this sport, and you have to be very careful with it. So that's why, as I even mentioned to Chris, coaches make things easier. They'll come with complications and challenges too, but if you have a good coach that aligns with your values, that's the best way to do any of these things. And even fat loss itself, I can't recommend it enough. It doesn't even matter if you, want to reach out to me as a coach. I highly recommend you have some support system within it. You think about how Chris Watson did his first show. He at least talks to people. He at least has conversation with people who are doing what he wanted to do. And so support is invaluable in a process that you're unfamiliar with, because you'll get there quicker. And that's a big part of it. It filters out noise. You don't do things that are a waste of time. But I'll tell you from my own experience, it's the support. It's having someone to talk to and be like, hey, what do you do when this problem comes up? What do you do with this? And you have too many thoughts in your head, and it can steer you down a poor path. So again, I hope you learned a lot from this episode. I hope it was a bit of fun for you to appreciate the different styles and techniques and tactics. And we only got to really scratch the surface of a lot of those things, but with other episodes, I know you probably would have hopefully listened to the episode with Brett Raffel, who's a posing coach himself, and we dive into things, and with me and AJ, we dive into things as well. So there's always something different about training and nutrition with these approaches. There's some similarities, and it's a pretty fascinating science. And I feel like even though I still say, ask me every 2 to 4 years if I'm going to do another show, I have to admit that I'm enjoying the sport more than I even did going into it. So there's a lot here. Thank you so much for listening today. I really appreciate you listening. please share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and definitely share it with someone else that you think might be interested in understanding more about the bodybuilding sport. And thanks again to Chris. This was a wonderful episode, and I hope that this episode inspires you in some way to continue to take action towards your goal, towards what you're trying to do with your training, nutrition, and your mindset, because we know when it comes down to it on this show and in life, it is not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within that pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.